You're listening to Two Bobs, conversations on the art of creative entrepreneurship with David C. Baker and Blair Enns.
David, what's the riskiest thing you've ever done?
I've always wanted to have a really long pregnant pause right after you start something, because you're always telling me I can regain the power with silence. The biggest risk I've taken was probably telling my wife about the risks I was going to take.
Yeah, right. Wow. Hands up, everybody.
She's only told me there's one thing I could not do, and it's so illogical. She says I cannot jump out of an airplane. She doesn't care if I fly them or race or whatever, but I can't jump out, which seems so illogical. So as soon as I get some, you know what, I'm going to jump out of an airplane.
Because you've got some high-risk hobbies. I mean, I'm not sure that you indulge in all of them, but tell us a little bit about your high-risk hobbies. List them off, because it's a little bit incredible. Here's the consultant, somebody who types for a living. But,
oh, that is dismissive.
Well, I refer to myself that way, too. Like, I'm a typist.
Okay.
Right? I have friends who have calluses. Like, they're real men. You and I, we type and talk on the phone.
Okay, so I taught motorcycle racing. I fly airplanes and helicopters. I travel to very dangerous parts of the country.
Yeah.
I love the shooting sports, not shooting at each other. I'm not so much into those. And I don't hunt, but I like shooting sports. And I do a podcast with you. That's pretty up there, too. What are yours?
Yeah, right. Okay. So I knew I was going to open with this question. For those of you listening, if anybody's listening, this is the risk episode where we're going to talk about various types of risk. But to answer your question, when I knew I was going to pose this question to you, I started thinking, well, what's the most riskiest thing I've ever done? And other than some things that were driven by kind of alcohol and youth that were just outright stupid when I put my life or the lives of others in danger.
Yeah.
Other than that, I can't, the riskiest things I've done in business have been investing in the business. By that, I mean spending money, seeing something as an investment, but knowing in the short term, the expense is potentially debilitating to the business.
Right.
But then trusting that it's going to pay off in revenue down the road.
Oh, the biggest risk you took that I can remember was when you totally changed your business model to a training model from a consulting model. That was a huge risk to me. At least it felt, maybe it didn't feel that way to you as much as it did to me. I was looking from the outside in marvel, really. I was thinking, wow, that is a big risk.
You were thinking, wow, that is a stupid move. I remember you telling me like a year later, you could still go back to being a consultant. And I couldn't, because I wrote that 3,000-word blog post called Confessions of a Recovering Consultant. And the reason I did it is I put it out there so that I would not, that was my version of burning the ships, so that I would not go back.
Right.
And here we are.
But you do take some pretty significant physical risks. They may not seem like it to you because of where you live, but, you hike in pretty crazy places and you poke bears, maybe not literally, but close to it.
I once said to my son, who was 15 at the time, I said, you're one of the few people in the world who has put your hand into a grizzly bear's mouth. And he responded promptly by saying, I'm one of the few people in the world who has stuck a thermometer up a grizzly bear's butt.
Except he didn't use that word, but yes, we gathered.
He did. Okay, so enough about us. So I sent you a text saying, hey, we should do a whole show on risk, because probably like 1 in 3 or 4 episodes, we keep coming back to this subject of risk and how much risk that the principles of creative firms take. So where do you want to start here? Do you want to start with your Minsky quote?
I never used to pay any attention to economists until you kept quoting different economists to me. So as I was thinking about risk last night, watching a very boring TV show, I found this quote that just struck me. It's by Hyman Minsky. And it says this. He said, stability is destabilizing. And then there was an article in the Wall Street Journal talking about that concept. And the author said, that's because, so in other words, stability is destabilizing because long periods of calm induce behavior and innovation that make the next downturn more violent. And I was thinking about times in history where all the nobles are safe in the castles and the rest of the people are dismissed, and all of a sudden they revolt against everybody. You think about all of these cycles that have happened over time and the apparent stability that just slowly, like boiling a frog in water, people don't even notice. And all of a sudden it just breaks out. Or you think about some of the terrible diseases that have wiped out millions of people. Or you think about some of the financial crises that almost all of us now are not too young to remember, like the housing crisis and so on. And yet we think that somehow this isn't going to happen. And then other times we think it's going to happen. The more I thought about risk, the more confused I got, really, because I think of myself as quite a risk taker, but I also wonder if I really am.
Isn't that interesting? Why do you doubt that?
Well, because I have one of those personalities that thinks really carefully about the implications of something, and then I just do it. So I have what's called a DC conflict in a personality. So I tend to overthink things a lot, and I'm a bit of a control freak.
Yeah.
And then I think, well, after I've thought through this much, it doesn't feel like that much of a risk. That's why it doesn't feel like I'm as much a risk taker, I think, as maybe other people seeing my behavior might think that I am, because it just, I'm willing to do this. But also, you and I have had really interesting conversations, usually after a Manhattan or whatever we happen to be drinking.
It's a Negroni this year. Let's just be clear. This is the year of the Negroni.
The year of the Negroni. That's right. Yeah. But I have run my business and my life in a way that I'm going to try to make principled decisions. And that means that I'm not going to stop short of those because of fear. So I am willing to picture myself homeless, that is, without a business, without any significant level of asset, and I will still be making decisions based on principle. That just seems like such a logical position for me to have. And so in that sense, it doesn't feel all that risky to me, because what's the worst that can happen? Oh, homelessness. Oh, I'm okay with that. That's why risk is a confusing concept to me.
And I think some people listening to this might think, oh, that's a bit of an exaggeration. But like, as somebody who knows you and has had many conversations with you in which you have brought up that scenario,
right?
You have very vividly painted this scenario of you being homeless. You usually had a dog.
Right.
You've lived in this future state where you've imagined it quite a bit. And so you've tried it on and thought, yeah, I'm okay with that, as long as I can live with myself and the decisions that I've made.
Right. I believe that I am a few stupid mistakes. Let's say I'm struggling with some emotional or mental issue and I make a bad decision, and then it's compounded by another one out of panic. So 2 decisions.
Yeah.
Do you think you are a couple of decisions away from a very altered lifestyle?
Oh, wow. You're probably asking me at exactly, I won't get into details, but we're considering a big move in the business, financial move. And so I have thought, okay, like if this goes wrong, I'm really vulnerable. If this goes wrong and something else goes wrong, I might be starting over. But like you, being bankrupt and starting over doesn't worry me. It worries me because it would terrify my wife and my obligation to my marital partner. My kids will be fine. I'm okay with starting over. When you get these compounded variables, it's like, okay, I'm going to take a big risk.
Yeah.
And you take a big risk and it doesn't work out. Usually we're not betting the entire firm or our entire lifestyle on it. But if something else happens at the same time, then possibly we're wiped out. And that's how populations go extinct. Mm-hmm. This combination of a steady pressure and then an incident. And I forget, there's a name for it. It'll come to me in a second. So the steady pressure might be economic decline. So we're in a period of recession, and then something goes wrong. So when you get those 2 variables together, that's when everybody's really vulnerable. I was really interested in this topic because a friend of mine, Jonathan Stark on Twitter, he's a developer and teaches developers about value-based pricing. And he was tweeting about an episode of one of his podcasts recently, and I haven't listened to it yet, but he was just this subject of risk. I forget what his question was, but I tweeted that, and I was really thinking through this as I was forming the tweet. I've come to the conclusion that the state of entrepreneurship is that you are all in all the time. You always have a bet on the line. And his reply was, yeah, but you're not always betting the business. It's a series of small bets. And I tweeted back, yeah, I agree with that, but I don't fully agree with that. I want to come back to that Hyman Minsky quote in a minute, but I think there's something about the state of entrepreneurship where you are always walking some sort of line. And when I read Minsky's quote, let's just reread it again. So, stability is destabilizing. That's because long periods of calm induce behavior and innovation that make the next downturn more violent. I read that quote, I think of our listeners, our clients, and the ones who are like, they get comfortable. They build a comfortable business.
Mm-hmm.
They're not constantly reassessing their business model. And then along comes change, and they're just caught flat-footed. It's like your friend who says, yeah, my wife left me, and
it was a surprise.
We didn't even have any trouble. We never argued. And you think, you idiot. A married person needs to be just slightly paranoid about the state of their marriage the way an entrepreneur needs to be slightly paranoid about the state of the market, that something could come along, the karate instructor or whoever it is.
I just love how you just lay your whole life out in front of thousands of people.
Well, I've learned my wife doesn't listen to this podcast, so I'm okay.
Oh, that's giving you lots of freedom. Yeah.
When you read the Minsky quote, were you thinking about yourself, or were you thinking about those clients that you've had who it's like good, stable business and they're playing golf, or they're so comfortable, they don't change anything, and all of a sudden the conditions are slowly changing like the boiling frog, and then bang, they wake up one day and everything is different, and they kind of blame the market, or they don't understand what's happened to them. And what's happened to them is they got comfortable. They weren't sufficiently paranoid to the point that they weren't constantly reinventing things, constantly taking risk. That's what I see in that quote. What do you see?
I see the same thing. And your description of these entrepreneurs, these principals that are listening, is exactly right. They wake up in the morning, and if they're not worried, they're worried. Like, they're worried about nothing to worry about. They're always paranoid about something, even if they have to make up something that they're paranoid about. They envision that maybe an employee is plotting with a client to take the business, or they read something that isn't even there in a comment that a client made about, oh, their client's going to leave, or they read something in the news about how this entire industry is changing. So, yeah, that's exactly right. But I feel conflicted because on the one hand, I look at firms who just toil under the radar. They're not firms that anybody is trying to emulate. You know, they're not winning all kinds of awards. They're not the cool places that all the young folks want to go work at. They just do good, solid work. They've got solid financial fundamentals as well. They've got decent principles about how to manage people. And year after year, they make money. Then you have the other ones who are innovating at the front line and creating new service offerings and saying, hey, you know what? Nobody's going to be developing websites in 3 years. So in 1 year, I'm going to stop doing that and reinvent myself. What's the better model? Because I just don't see too many firms who have much of a balance between those two things. It seems like it's one or the other. And I want, maybe this is my personality coming through here, but I want a little bit more balance. And I hate the fact that they're constantly paranoid, but I love the fact that they're constantly paranoid. Does that make sense even?
So you're saying at one end of the spectrum, there is an unhealthy paranoia.
Right.
Right? Just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they're not out to get you.
Right.
And at the other end of the spectrum, there's this complacency.
Right.
And you're saying you would like to see more firms in the middle that have, where the principal has a healthy level of paranoia. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, I am. And I wish there was some way to figure out where principals were on that spectrum. Like, here's an example. This may not be the answer, okay, but it illustrates what I'm thinking of. Maybe you need to be making your employees a little bit nervous most of the time, but not flat terrifying them, right?
I agree with that completely. I really identify with that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Or another would be, you need to run a culture where people really want to stay and work for you, but some of them should still leave for the right reasons. So we don't want to read too much into people, or read the wrong things into people leaving. We want them to leave for the right reasons and so on. I'm just inventing these on the fly. I don't know exactly what the answers are here. And then there's also this whole notion of an efficient marketplace. Here's an example of that. So an efficient marketplace says that there are very few unexplored arbitrage opportunities, in that a market will usually fill in those low spots on the road or knock off those high spots on the road within a couple days. Okay. But entrepreneurs, principals, folks listening, our clients, your clients, they're always seeing like, oh my God, there is an unmet need that I can fill. But they don't think about those opportunities very objectively. And the same sort of objectivity they bring to solving problems for their clients, they don't bring that same level of objectivity to solving problems for themselves in terms of evaluating the soundness of an opportunity. So this is why, as we were thinking about this topic, I'm thinking, you're always saying that the sample of the work you do for the client is the sale. You say it differently, but that's the idea.
The sale is the sample.
Sale is the sample, yeah. And here, the fact that we are bouncing all over the place, this is the risk thing, and we're taking a huge risk even talking about all this stuff without really knowing. We're flailing around here. We're just kind of getting inside each other's heads a little bit.
You're listening to Two Bobs, conversations on the art of creative entrepreneurship. Your hosts are David C. Baker of Recourses, author, speaker, and advisor to owners of expert firms, and Blair Enns of Win Without Pitching, the sales training and coaching program for creative entrepreneurs. For more information, go to twobobs.com. If you find this podcast helpful, please help us by telling a friend and rating us on iTunes. Thank you. Now back to David and Blair.
Okay, we're talking about risk. This is the risk episode. Do you remember, David, a couple of years ago, I asked you to translate something into Latin for me? Do you remember what the phrase was? And I said, this is my personal motto.
No, I don't. I don't remember that.
So looking up on the wall, I'm still seeing your handwriting of the various ways to translate this into Latin. But it's unpredictable, but dependable.
Mm.
And to me, I just looking at this, it's still tacked to my wall. I'm thinking, when you were mentioning how your employees should maybe be a little bit nervous about what you're going to do next, I was thinking about, I really enjoy in my relationship with my wife, who is not only my life partner, but my business partner, I enjoy the role of disruptor. I enjoy the role of being the person who shows up and says, okay, we're going to take a whole bunch of risk. And then she and the other calm people around me kind of have this little meltdown. And I enjoy seeing them go into meltdown mode. So it's really important for me as my personal identity. And I really wonder, the people listening out there, all the entrepreneurs, I wonder if you identify with this as well. To be seen as unpredictable, but not unstable. I would like to be known as somebody, not just in business, but in life, who is seen as, you never know what Blair is going to do next. But I know I can always depend on him.
Yes, buttressed with the fact that you have scared them before.
Yes, and they have survived.
And they've also seen, they've followed your lead, and you led them through the Red Sea, and nobody, or not too many people drowned.
I didn't lose many.
You didn't lose many,
Yeah.
right. So the idea is that, okay, I've had crazy ideas in the past. Some of them have not worked out, but enough of them have that we should at least have a really good discussion about this. And in the end, I'm going to listen to what everybody says, but I'm going to make a decision on my own, kind of like, maybe not on my own. That's a little bit, that doesn't sound good, but it's not going to be democratized.
Yeah, with the input of others.
Right.
So I wonder if that shouldn't be the motto of all entrepreneurs and not just me. While we're skipping across risk-related topics here, another thing I really wanted to talk about is this idea of no exit. So a few years ago, I had a revelation about my own business from a couple of different sources. One was the Strategic Coach Program and Dan Sullivan, and another was an entrepreneur who had said something publicly. I'd had this revelation and this epiphany that I was never going to sell my business and I was never going to retire. So I wrote a lengthy blog post about it called No Exit. And I've since done a bunch of exercises around this when I'm speaking to a room full of agency principals. And the first time I did this was at Revenue 2.0.
Mm-hmm.
That's an event you and I did together twice about alternative business models. And I do this talk that I have called the 5 Constraints. But the first constraint is this idea of no exit. So if you're listening to this, if you're the owner of a business of any kind, whether it's a creative or marketing business or some other kind, I want you to try on this constraint. The constraint is that you can never sell your business and you can never retire. And then I'll just stop there while you think about that for a second. And then I'll ask you, if that's the constraint you had to live by, what are the changes that you would make in your business right now?
Mm-hmm.
Make a list of the changes that need to be made in your business. And then what are the changes that need to be made in your life? So I give people a couple of minutes to make some notes. And then I ask the audience, all right, what did you write down? And people say, well, I've got to change my role. I've got to quit sacrificing today for tomorrow. It's important that I show up to do a job that I love. So I've got to change my role. I've got to delegate. I've got to take more vacation.
Right.
So many people say, I need to start working out. I'm not exactly sure how that's connected, but it's a really interesting constraint. The real source of it, I was inspired by a couple of different people, but the real source of it is I noticed this pattern in my clients' businesses. And when the principal gets to a certain age, and the age is just a few years shy of where I'm 52 at this recording, so I start to see it around 55, late 50s. Definitely in the early 60s. When somebody gets to that age, when they can tell me when they're going to retire, I know it's over. It's over because as soon as they have one eye on the exit, they quit taking risk. Have you seen this too?
I have, but I've never seen it expressed quite like that. Immediately I say, oh, that's something I could study.
Yeah.
Because as soon as they have a date, 3 years, now what does their decision-making look like when they know that it's only going to be 3 years or 5 years or 2 years or whatever it is?
I'll tell you this anecdotally, if somebody says they've got an eye on a retirement date that's within 5 years, they will not make a difficult decision around positioning.
I was just going to ask. Positioning would seem to be the likely one. What are some of the other topics they would avoid decisions around?
They won't make difficult staffing decisions. I might not be right about this, but I'll say it anyway because it never stopped me before.
Wait, is this the same Blair? Who took your mic?
They kind of cede control of the culture. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. But, if you think about like a vibrant firm, at the helm of the firm is a truly inspired leader whose primary job is to keep an eye on the horizon and say, we're going this way. And to make decisions about things that are going to happen in the future, spotting things in the market, spotting trends in technology, et cetera, et cetera. So that vision is at least 5 years out. And as soon as that vision gets to 5 years, 4 years, 3 years, they're not really thinking about the health of the firm long term. That has a significant impact on the culture of the firm. The energy is different. As I'm talking about this, I'm hoping that you can imagine firms or just recall firms that you've walked into where you realize, oh yeah, this is not a vibrant young place. And it's not so much to do with the chronological age of the people, although that is a factor. But the energy of a place where the principal is thinking about retirement is completely different. As soon as the principal starts thinking about retirement, they lose, I don't know if it's moral authority, but they become less of a guiding force. So where does the guiding force come from? Maybe it doesn't come from anywhere. Maybe there's a power battle.
Nature fills a vacuum, right? So if they're not leading, then somebody's going to step up. I think I can illustrate what happens along this same line. What I have seen is that you will be more tolerant of talented assholes as employees. You do that not just because you don't want to rock the boat, but because this talented asshole is somebody that has taken something away from you and you don't want to step back in. You don't want to find somebody else to do this for you. And that is making a huge ethical compromise, honestly.
Yeah, well, and that's part of the problem I have with it. I do see some of these compromises as ethical compromises. You avoid the big fights. You absolutely quit taking risk in the marketplace, and that's another element of risk. My favorite Peter Drucker quote of the so many great Peter Drucker quotes is, in business, all profit comes from risk. And I like to add, in life, all profit comes from risk. So you imagine that, okay, if that's the nature of profit and risk in business, so you imagine that your client decides that they're going to go out into the marketplace and take some risk in the market as a way of earning profit. So first of all, your client decides, I'm going to take some risk. And then they hire you. And in part, what they're hiring you to do is to make some of that risk go away. And in every price that you charge, put forward to your client or charge to your client, there's some sort of risk level built into the price. So there's just risk all around. And when somebody in the middle of the equation, that is the principal of a firm, quits taking risk, then everything it doesn't grind to a halt, but everything kind of slows down, gets less interesting, less value is created.
And clients start to run things more as well. You don't push back.
Yeah, and there's another tough decision that you're not going to make. You're not going to push back on this client. You think, 3 more years.
Yeah.
3 more years.
Don't want to upset the apple cart.
I have some friends who are cops, and once they get 20 years service in, they always say 3 bad days. If I have 3 bad days in a row, I can just quit and I've got pension. And I feel like that's what happens to agency principals when they have one eye on the exit. So I'm not saying, I just want to clarify here, I'm not saying you can never retire. I'm saying you obviously want to build a business, you want to create your wealth. So at any moment, you can stop, you can shut it down. But the idea that an entrepreneur is going to, in 5 years from now, I'm going to keep sacrificing, and then in 5 years or whatever the time period is, I'm going to shut it all down or go do something else and start my new life. I think if that's what's driving you, if that's kind of your vision, maybe you've just inherited it from the previous generation where we were taught for whatever reason that that's how things are done. We just need to unlearn this old practice of retirement. We should just get away from this practice of retirement. Or you've just built your business in a way that it's just ongoing sacrifice, sacrifice, sacrifice. So what I'm advocating is your business should serve you, right? Structure your business in a way that it serves you, in a way that you love showing up to work and you're energized by work and you're making good money and you're getting all of your needs met. And you get to this place where your business is so good at serving you that the idea of retirement becomes ridiculous.
Right. Now, if you catch this early enough, let's say, and I get this because I get calls from people who want me to help sell their business. And if it's early enough in the process, I can probe and say, oh, you know what? This isn't the problem. The problem is that you're just not as interested in it anymore, but we're catching this quick enough. You could reinvent yourself and you wouldn't want to sell your business. And sometimes that's quite possible, right? But if you're past that tipping point, there's very little that can happen. So I'm hoping that as people listen to this, they're inspired to be honest with themselves about this and to live with some of the discomfort and the paranoia and to let that make them feel alive, and to embrace the risk-taking, and also to picture themselves homeless or whatever that looks like for them. Maybe it's just not enough money for a latte tomorrow or whatever. But picture themselves and embrace that fear and then make better decisions that follow some deeply held principles that you have and not be dragged along by the marketplace. My goodness, that's what I hope people hear here.
Yeah. And again, back to this point I was trying to make earlier is at some point, things change, your partner, like health problems, whatever, everything changes. And you do want to be in a position where you can shut your business down or sell it if there's a willing buyer. I'm not saying you can never sell your business and you can never retire, because there are times for lots of people when it's going to make sense to do one or the other. What I'm saying is you should operate your business with this idea that you're going to die with your boots on, so that you never quit taking risk. You never quit facing the difficult business decisions. And I want to close by, I'll give you the last word here, but I want to close my part here by recalling a tweet that I saw last week on the subject. I'm not sure who it was from. I think it was a financial advisor. And he was saying the pattern in life when it comes to retirement is you've got a job, right? And at some point you get to a certain age, you realize at this rate, I'm not going to have enough money to retire in the style that I want to retire. So that situation, that realization forces you into entrepreneurship. So you begin to take risk and you start a business. And then what this guy says is the inevitable is you make the money that will allow you to retire, but you're having so much fun now that you completely you discard the idea of retirement. And this guy is saying this is a pattern that he sees over and over again. And that really resonated with me. I think there are certain jobs that you absolutely have to retire from. There's certain businesses that it might make sense to retire from. But when you're already an entrepreneur, you're already taking risk. We're not coal miners. You're not wearing out your body. I think you structure your business today so that it remains fascinating to you. And the requirement of that is that you keep taking risk. And when you do that, and you don't have one eye on the horizon, you're going to focus on living a long, healthy life. You're going to focus on shaping your role in your business so that it serves you. And the idea of ever retiring is going to be absurd. So that's my last word on this. What do you want to finish on?
I can't top that. We'll leave it at that. I think that's a very apt way to end this thing. And it's been fun to talk about this risk. There's just such a brotherhood out there, right, of risk takers, and almost like a secret handshake. You meet somebody that you hardly know, but they're an entrepreneur, and you immediately know that there's something you share with them. It's this risk-taking thing. And all of a sudden you understand their world, even when you don't even know it yet. It's just an amazing thing.
That is so profound. And I got goosebumpy when you were talking about it, because I'm remembering there is no room I would rather be in than a room full of entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
Like a room full of people taking risk. And then you drop the person in who's like got his eye on the retirement. It's like, yeah, you're in the wrong room, dude.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, this has been great.
Yeah.
This has been fantastic discussion. Thank you, Blair.
Thanks, David. Talk to you next time.
Thank you for listening to Two Bobs with David C. Baker and Blair Enns. Subscribe and learn more at twobobs.com. That's the number 2, BOBS.com.